Thank you for joining us for day 2 of the virtual pilgrimage along the St. Hildegard Way. Yesterday we started with sharing with you the conception behind the St. Hildegard Way and the vision from Dr. Annette Esser. And today we're going to start with one of the first of the 10 stations that we visited last summer and we filmed at. And actually, the background behind me is the location from that setting. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hand this off to the Hildegard House in Fairport Harbor for the ringing of the bells to begin our day.
Welcome back for day 2 of our pilgrimage on the Hildegard Way. My name is Reverend Dr. Shannon Sterringer, and I am coming to you live from the Hildegard House in Fairport Harbor, Ohio. We begin our journey today in the town of Idar-Oberstein, a town rich in precious gemstones. I have here with me today a beautiful piece of amethyst, gifted to the Hildegard House from a friend. It is normally displayed on our gemstone cabinet with many additional crystals and precious stones, some of which I brought back with me from Idar-Oberstein last summer while I traveled the Hildegard Way. Many are surprised to learn that Hildegard wrote positively about the use of gemstones and crystals for healing and protection. There is a stigma attached in the Catholic Christian world to using stones in this way because some feel it blurs the lines between Orthodox Christian practice and New Age spirituality. There is a hesitancy within some Catholic circles to go too deep into Hildegard for this reason. Nonetheless, Hildegard believed stones carried an energy endowed to them by God for our use. Stones are a part of the divine creation. In her visions, Hildegard saw the New Jerusalem, as it is described in the book of Revelation, in its glory, built from precious stones. In the same manner that God created trees, flowers, sunsets, ocean shores, God created stones. Hildegard, as you may know, was a Benedictine nun. Her day would have been immersed in the sacred scriptures. Throughout the day, she prayed the Liturgy of the Hours and participated in the Mass. Formally, she prayed liturgically. She also prayed when she was working, or et labora is the Benedictine motto, meaning prayer and work. She prayed when she was healing. She prayed when she was cooking. Hildegard's entire day was an act of prayer. She not only knew the scriptures, she integrated them into her very being. Gemstones, as well as herbs and essential oils, are mentioned throughout the Bible for our use, and she would have known those references well. Together with her lived experience, she saw gemstones as a rich gift given to us from God. These crystals not only have a practical application, but she saw a spiritual one as well. In the book of Exodus, chapter 28, the instructions for creating priestly vestments were to include 12 gemstones, some of which we'll see in the video today, to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. The book of Revelation, chapter 21, also includes these gemstones, not only to illuminate the walls of the New Jerusalem, but to protect it from anything unholy entering. Behind me here on the wall is a piece of art depicting Hildegard's vision of the fallen stars, as she recorded it in Scipia's 3:1. In this vision, Lucifer, whose name literally means light bearer, is a central character. She believed Lucifer was adorned with precious stones at his creation. In the tradition, God created Lucifer brighter than all of the other angels. However, he became so enamored by his own light, he turned his gaze away from its true source. He began to see himself as a god. This is a temptation we continue to face today as individuals and a society. We forget we are not the creator. We are created. By shifting his focus from the God of the universe who created him onto himself, a created being, Lucifer immediately fell from the celestial realm into the abyss of darkness, and the light in him was extinguished. When we hear the phrase, the fall, we often think of the story of Adam and Eve and the snake and the fruit tree. But this scene of the fallen stars here behind me depicts the fall before the fall. In her work, Physica, St. Hildegard of Bingen wrote the following regarding gemstones. Every stone contains fire and moisture. The devil abhors, detests, and disdains precious stones. This is because he remembers that their beauty was manifest on him before he fell from glory, the glory that God had given him. And because some precious stones are engendered from fire, in which he receives as his punishment, by the will of God, the devil was vanquished by the fire into which he fell, just as he is vanquished by the fire of the Holy Spirit, when humans are snatched from his jaws by the first breath of the Holy Spirit. God had decorated the first angel as if with precious stones. Lucifer, upon seeing them shine in the mirror of the divinity, took knowledge from them and recognized that God wished to do so many wondrous things. His mind was exalted and filled with pride, since the beauty of the stones which covered him shone in God. He thought that he could do deeds both equal to and greater than God's. And so in his splendor, he was extinguished. But just as God restored Adam to a better part, he sent neither the beauty nor the powers of those precious stones into perdition, but willed that they would be held in honor and blessing on earth and be used for medicine. Hildegard embodied a mystical awareness of the relationship between human beings and the created world. She believed the power to heal and protect did not belong to the stone itself. It was not magical, but it belonged fully to God's will. If God wills a person to be healed by a stone, whether the healing is in mind, body, or spirit, she or he will be healed. If God does not will it, it will not be done. Neither the practitioner nor the recipient, in Hildegard's understanding, controls the outcome. The power comes alone from God. From a Christian perspective and from a place of Hildegard studies, this is an important distinction to make when using gemstones. To assume we have the power to control the elements would be an act of turning our gaze from God onto ourselves. And as we just heard in the story of the fallen stars, this is not the path we are being called to walk. It is interesting to consider that thousands of women and a handful of men would later be tortured and burned at the stake by the Catholic Church for using gemstones in some of the same ways Hildegard prescribed. When Pope Benedict XVI named her a doctor of the Church, it affirmed and validated her entire corpus of writings. including her use of natural elements for health and healing. The cohesiveness of her worldview offers a holistic perspective our world so desperately needs today. As with anything else in this world, crystals can be used with a dark intention, and these elements are at times misused and abused, which creates the stigma I mentioned previously. But St. Hildegard reminds us that their misuse was not what God intended when these glorious stones were created. They were created to be conduits for energy and light, which is why they are used in the world of science and medicine today, in scanning machines and other electronic devices. As pilgrims on a spiritual journey, we have an opportunity to take a few moments to ask ourselves, in what ways have I turned my gaze from God, the creator of the universe and the source of all light and life? Have I become self-focused, self-absorbed, or simply selfish? Am I reflecting living light in the way I live my life, or has my light been waning? The goal of a pilgrimage is not perfection. It is an opportunity to do our own personal work so that we might emerge from the experience greener, healthier, and holier than when we began. We take a moment and we put ourselves in God's presence. And as we prepare to set out on our journey today, we ask the God of the living light to be with us, to guide us, to illuminate our path, and to help us shine our light in every place, with every person, and in every situation we find ourselves. May we always remember that the light we shine is not because of our own accord, but it is God's light shining through us. We will now watch a video from the Hildegard Way.
Join us now on the beginning of the Hildegard Way. Our station is at the old marketplace of Ida Oberstein, where we are looking up to the church in the rocks, the Felsenkirche. We listen to Hildegard speaking about precious stones and the heavenly Jerusalem.
Anno Domini 1098. I was born on this side of Gaul, which is full of precious stones. This was after the turning point of the times, when the glowing teaching of the apostles had already become lax, and men of God had begun to waver. In this time,
virgins like me were called by God to show strength and to proclaim the word of God. Well, jewels have always delighted me. As we all know,
there was already bdellium and onyx stone in the Garden of Paradise, and the devil recoils in fear from gemstones. Thus, I believe that precious stones can also protect humans and even have certain healing effects on them. After all, the heavenly Jerusalem is also built from 12 jewels that can all be found in this area here, just as it is written in the Revelation of John. The city lies 4 squares.
Its length the same as its width. The wall is built of jasper, while the city is pure gold, clear as glass. The foundations of the wall of the city are adorned with every jewel. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates are 12 pearls. Each of the gates is a single pearl, and the street of the city is pure gold, transparent as glass.
Now, I believe that in this period of Salvation history now, we are called to build up the city of God till the end of times.
The Hildegard Way then leads us from the Nahe Valley through the forest into the midst of the Hunsrück mountain range. We come to the medieval town of Herrstein. Thank you for watching. I'm Dr. Annette Esser, and we hope you enjoyed following us on this stage of the Hildegard Way. There is so much more to come as we follow the trail and reflect on Hildegard, her visions and wisdom, and the beauty of the places she loved. Please join us and discover the land of Hildegard.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you now.
That's
But
okay.
I saw the film. I saw the film and I didn't hear you.
Okay,
after.
good. Well, you're live right at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and set up the next video. So if you maybe just want to say a little something to everybody who's watching, that
Okay.
would just be wonderful. And then I'll let you know
Okay.
when I'm back. Okay.
All right. To say something, you just saw the video, which was at the start of the Hildegard Way in Ida Oberstein, which is really the city of gemstones. And that's why we sort of introducing us to the Book of Stones in the Liber Physica of Hildegard. And stones are not just stones, but for Hildegard, of course, all this is connected to the heavenly Jerusalem. And the stones she describes are all in the book of Revelation. And it's, so I mentioned these 12 stones out of which the city of God is built. And the city of God is also the image of Hildegard in the third book of her Liber Scivias. It's not just the city coming to us at the end of times, but it's really something we are building up in a synergy of God and man, where this is our task now in this time of salvation history, to build up together with God and together with each other this city of God. That is Hildegard's idea, and I found it fascinating, also the image of building, because Hildegard lived in construction sites all her life, at the Disibodenberg, also before in Sponheim. Probably she observed the construction of the Sponheim monastery, and later on in Bingen, where her own women's monastery was set up. So the building image is very great. And the question is, what are we building on? And those are these 12 stones. And in Ida Oberstein, they sell all these stones, they dig them, and they make a profile. And it's, I mean, you saw some of the stones from the museum in Ida Oberstein, I think, where we filmed as well.
And I think we took some of the stones back with us. We bought some stones.
Yes, yes. And of course, I mean, Hildegard describes the certain impact of healing of these stones. And we met people that have said, yes, of course, if you wear stones, they have a healing effect. And it's also used for cures of certain kinds. And the idea that the devil recoils from gemstones, from jewels, I think that's fascinating. And I think actually, if they were clever, they should really sell stones to the pilgrims there at the beginning of the Hildegard Way, each of them getting their own stone. That's, yeah, would be good.
I think we ended up, that's right, we ended up buying stones, but we had to carry them every day with us.
Yes, I think Shannon bought quite some stones over there, which she had to carry, I don't know.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm ready to show our first short talk video.
So we're going to be starting today's section of St. Hildegard Speaks. We have Dr. Carolyn Muessig with us. Good morning, how are you today?
Good morning, Heather. Very well, how are you?
I'm well today. And where are you speaking to us from today?
I'm speaking from Calgary, where I've just moved to start a new position here at the University of Calgary, in Religion and Classics.
And where were you before Calgary?
I was at the University of Bristol in the Religion and Theology department there for over 25 years.
And how did you first come across St. Hildegard? How did you discover her in your studies?
Well, I'm very interested in the role of women in the medieval church, in particular in the church in general. And Hildegard immediately comes to mind, because she is an extraordinary example of a woman who was known to preach publicly. So that really caught my attention when I heard that she went against the received tradition or wisdom of what we think about the Middle Ages, that she really stood out against that. And really was the tip of the iceberg, and in fact led me to see that there were other women who were preaching in the medieval church. So yes, it was her uniqueness that attracted me, and her outspokenness.
And it's remarkable that 800 years later we're still talking about her.
Yes, yes, and I think it's for those very reasons. Perhaps we may think more about her sanctity. If you think of the idea of sanctity and humbleness, Hildegard in many ways again goes against that grain. Of maybe not being humble, but being very outspoken. And it's for these reasons, I think, that she is remembered, and that ultimately and ironically, she does become a saint.
So were you a student, or were you already teaching when you discovered Hildegard?
When I discovered Hildegard, I was more of right at the end of my PhD, because I wrote on the history of preaching in the Middle Ages, but I was working on a famous male preacher. And so I came across Hildegard towards the end of my studies. I heard about her, but I never had really worked on her. And I did my PhD in the 1980s, early 90s. And that's really when the study of the role of women in the medieval church and in the church in general really was coming open, wide open. And I joined that trend of hearing what people had to say, and that's why I was really struck. I thought, wow, if I had known more about Hildegard earlier on, I may have worked on her for my PhD. So yes, it was through exploration, through preaching again, that I discovered her late in my PhD career, but was determined to incorporate Hildegard into some of my teaching when I got a position to teach. I was very keen to teach Hildegard.
Something that I've always found remarkable about her is, I mean, number one, she was prolific in so many different areas, but how many times she was able to reinvent herself at the various stages of her life. And it really, I wouldn't exactly call her a late bloomer, but it just shows you that you can bloom and blossom at any age. I mean, to have had that awakening at 38 and then again at 53 to created her own space, it was just, it's very hopeful.
It is. I think it gives maybe us hope about everybody, regardless, men or women, that there are these rediscoveries regardless of age, but of determination and insight is really what counts. It's having that desire to rediscover and the curiosity. And she never loses that. In fact, it seems to become stronger and stronger as she goes on. So I think in that way, if we're looking for inspiration in regard to aging, and what is that? And where do we find strength? And what is are there cutoff points for rediscovery? And if we turn to Hildegard, we see absolutely not. In fact, it was her age in a way that freed her once she was not looked upon perhaps as a younger woman who could be viewed as a temptation or as a potential mother or all these things. It was transcending that sense of status related to the female state in the Middle Ages. And with that transcendence, I think of being held back by expectations tied to the body, she was released. And so it's no wonder that we really hear her voice in her 40s, in her 50s, up until her death. She becomes a much more demonstrative figure, I think, with each year that goes by. So that's something to hold close, I think, as I get older. I think that's an inspiration.
It does, and I think it does apply to men as well as women. It's very universal and it's very hopeful. Mm-hmm. So as far, because she was prolific in so many different areas, which of her, the medicine or the music, which of her areas or the theology really appealed to you the most? Or you have discovered the most about that surprised you?
Well, I think Hildegard of Bingen is an extremely subtle thinker. So when you first hear about her, when I first heard about her, I was really excited to read about what she did, what she wrote. But then I was hit with the fact that it was precisely because of this subtleness, the range of intellectual, theological, musical ability that she had, that it was a real challenge to conquer Hildegardian studies in that way. So I was attracted, and this is interesting, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is how I tried to teach about Hildegard, because when I first discovered her and really analyzed her writings and works, they were very challenging and very subtle, and you have to spend time with Hildegard. You have to really think about her language, about the imagery, all these things that lead you. It's a very monastic process, I think. If you're properly going to read and learn about Hildegard, you have to spend time with her. So it's not an immediate sort of realization, at least for me, of the profound genius there. It comes with time and with seeing how she really stands away from the traditions of a very traditional era, the types of images. But if you're trying to teach that to students, especially undergraduates, and you don't have a lot of time to delve into the subtleties of her thought, I was at a loss of how to communicate to them very quickly the importance of her writings and her place within history, within religious history, within the history of women, etc. So luckily for us, what was important for me to use as a source were Hildegard's letters, because her letters help me immediately focus on what I could get across to the students immediately, and that was Hildegard's humanity. And when we look to her letters, we see patterns in her thought that are relatable. For instance, what I like to focus on when I try to get students interested in Hildegard is looking at letters that show Hildegard's ideas of will and desire. So in particular, I focus on her relationship with Ricardis, who was a very close friend of Hildegard in the Rupertsberg, well, in the convent, in the cloister, and was very close to Hildegard when Hildegard was trying to initially establish Rupertsberg, and when she had just written her Scivias, her first major work. And Ricardis was her heart and soul, was her rock. And before she knew it, Ricardis was elected to another convent to become an abbess, and was taken away from Hildegard. And I've had my students read a series of letters that show Hildegard on this journey of love and desire and will, trying to win Ricardis back and trying to convince those around her that Ricardis should come back. She first writes to Ricardis's mother, certainly, 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 3 certainlys, this is not the will of God. This is not for Ricardis's salvation. Ricardis needs to come back. The mother can't do anything, doesn't do anything. Hildegard then writes to Ricardis's brother, who is an archbishop, and she says to him that this is against the will of God, and that you need to assist me to bring Ricardis back. She says this in a very humble way, but ultimately, again, this is not achievable for her. And she says that a horrible man has done this, has taken Ricardis away, and it's somebody who's above Hildegard. It's Abbot Kuno from Disibodenberg. And so she's trying to control her life and her love and her friendships and her relationships. And she ultimately writes to the Pope when she cannot get any where she cannot achieve her goal to get Ricardis back, and writes to the Pope to ask for his assistance for this. And he ultimately is not able to help her and can't fulfill her wishes. And what is touching is when Hildegard finally realizes that she must accept this, and she writes to Ricardis in the end and says that I love you more than I should, and that my eyes should be like an eagle's to the sun on God, like I should look at God, but my love for you is all too human. And so she realizes ultimately the weaknesses in herself, but also that episode of her determination, and I think more importantly, her love for Ricardis is so relatable, and it opens up Hildegard to us as a human, where we do often see her as a visionary, as a preacher, but also as a human being with desire, who loves and has a great sense of friendship. So I think that is a very relatable way to get Hildegard of Bingen on students' radar to appreciate the depth of her thought. And also, I think the willfulness of Hildegard, her determination. We see this, I think, in many aspects of her life, as we were discussing earlier. It doesn't diminish, her willfulness doesn't diminish with her age. In fact, in many ways, I think it becomes stronger. So if we think about in 1178, when Hildegard by this point, Rupertsberg is recognized as a very important monastery. Hildegard has a great reputation as a visionary. People give endowments, there's great building works. People are attracted to go to Rupertsberg because they recognize Hildegard as a great prophetess. And in one account in 1178, a nobleman died and was buried in the cemetery at Rupertsberg because it was a great honor to be buried there. However, it was believed that this particular nobleman had been excommunicated from the church, and the Mainz ecclesiastical community insisted that Hildegard and her nuns disinter the body and take it out of sacred ground. And she flatly refused, would not do this, because she argued that she was certain that this young nobleman had received absolution before his death, and to do otherwise would go against the will of God, who had received this young nobleman already into heaven. And so she, in essence, was saying, I know that this would go against God's will. And she stood up to this command. And as a result of her refusing their command, she was forbidden, she and her nuns were forbidden they were put under interdict, which meant that they could not hear Mass, they could not receive the Eucharist, and perhaps what's even the most hurtful thing for Hildegard is that they could not sing the divine office. And for Hildegard, this was a particularly hard pill to swallow. As we know, Hildegard's music to this day is wonderful and astounding. But she and her nuns were not allowed to sing the liturgy. And so the convent of Rupertsberg went silent. And Hildegard, this was deeply spiritually damaging, because Hildegard believed that humanity had been created by the breath of God. And the most amazing way to exhibit praise of God and creation was through the song of liturgy. And so this really damaged her or hurt her spiritually. So although it may sound to us, well, that shouldn't be so bad, for her it was the center and core of her being and her sisters.
Well, not being allowed to sing is also the reason why they left, one of the reasons they decided to leave Disibodenberg, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, the music was so important to her. So being silenced like that, I mean, they were silenced at Disibodenberg and then to be silenced again.
Yes, absolutely. I think, and this is again, Hildegard's desire to express her way of worship, and her will urged her on to do these different things. So absolutely, it resonates with the initial departure. And then almost, this is 6 months before she died, the interdict was lifted because of, again, her determination. And she went above the ecclesiastical lower men and went to the Archbishop of Mainz and ultimately had this lifted. So it's interesting. I think this compulsion and this impelling of will, it moved her, as you're saying, from Disibodenberg to Rupertsberg. It's this notion of her will moves her like a pilgrim in her search for God and looking for God. And in fact, when she does leave Disibodenberg, I think if I could read something by Aldebert, prior of Disibodenberg, of what he wrote to her, because yes, it was a clash of the wills between the abbot and Hildegard, but Hildegard on this occasion ultimately wins out and goes to Rupertsberg. But the prior writes something I think very beautiful and moving, that gives us insight to the creativity, to the importance of Hildegard in the Disibodenberg community and into the religious life of it as well, and what they were losing. So he writes to her shortly after she's left, "Since you send the words of your admonition into foreign regions and cause large numbers of people to desire the paths of righteousness, we who have known you almost from the cradle and with whom you lived for many years, wonder why you have withdrawn the words of your celestial visions from us who thirst for them. We remember how you were educated among us, how you were taught, how you were established in the religious life. For your instruction was that appropriate only to a woman, and a simple psalter was your only school book. But the will of God filled you with celestial dew and opened up to you the magnitude of its secrets. And just as we were set to rejoice in these things with you, God took you away from us against our will and gave you to another people. We cannot fathom why God did this, but we are suffering great distress from this deed. Wherefore, although we are far from holy, we beseech you, both for the glory of God and for the old and true fellowship, to remember us." So I think that is such a beautiful tribute to Hildegard. And in this way, I think Hildegard beckons us to remember her and to investigate and explore the desire of how she wanted to know God and herself, regardless of the struggles that might ensue. And so in a way, it's a very apt notion of, I think, of pilgrimage, of the way Hildegard's will led her through this path of discovery that I think attracts us through these years to her as well.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. So is there anything you'd like to close with? Any last thoughts you'd like to leave anyone with?
I think what in contemplating Hildegard, we usually remember her as a saint, as a prophet, as a reformer. And I think what is most powerful are the human elements of herself that come through, that make this great figure into somebody who was driven by a sense of purpose and love and desire. And I think that's really important, is to remember the human aspects of Hildegard.
That she was an actual person. It's just,
yes,
it's pretty remarkable to think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us on this section of St. Hildegard Speaks. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Heather.
Well, thank you, Carolyn Muessig. And thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again for St. Hildegard Speaks on the next section along the Hildegard Way Trail.
Thank you.
So one of the things I'm remembering as we go through these, as we start to go through the week, and you know, Heather and I have been pre-recording some of these videos, but it also just reminds me of my experience in terms of meeting with all these I call you guys Hildegardians. So since my first film came out in 2014, is that everybody has a different way of kind of telling some of these stories about Hildegard. And I think that's part of the fascinating aspect of her, is how our stories, how we kind of listen to different stories, and some stories we're more attuned to, and then we heard maybe another version of that story, and then we start to follow that story. So it's going to be really, by the time we get done with this in 12 days, you will probably have your own story now to be able to share about Saint Hildegard. So it's that wonderful combination of you know, that spiritual development we create with somebody who just inspires us, and then there's this sort of also dogmatic academic work that has gone into defining this person as well. So I'm hoping to give you that kind of blend for you to have your own experience with. So let me see if I have Shannon back over here.
I'm here, Michael.
Okay, I'm going to go and spotlight you.
While you're doing that, we did have some technical difficulties with the live piece at the beginning. So as Michael said, we'll re-record that, and that'll be available. But I did hear Annetta say that I bought quite a few stones while we were there, and I did. Of course, I buy wherever I go. But if you ever have an opportunity to come to the Hildegard House in Fairport Harbor, many of the stones, well, all of the stones really that I brought back from the trip are in a display case here in the church. So you can go on our website. We do have the case on the website, but you also can come into the space and see the stones that I brought back from Ida Oberstein last year.
So Shannon, do you want to go ahead and invite people to the next step so I can let them into set the breakout rooms up? And what we're going to do is manually, or we're just automatically going to put them into 2 rooms. I think we have about 60 people. Maybe I'll do 3 rooms, so I'll kind of keep it small.
Okay. Yeah, if we could just take a moment, I think, and just get ourselves centered and focused with the technology issues, I think, and it being Monday, I don't know about all of you, but I feel a little bit out of sorts. So as we prepare to go into these rooms to share all that we've heard today and what we've experienced on this little piece of the pilgrimage today, maybe we can just take a moment, get ourselves focused, think about what you heard from the video, what you might have heard from our scholar. As pilgrims on a spiritual journey, we have this opportunity to self-reflect, to consider where we've been and where we're going. And we ask as we move to our Anchorage rooms that we really might be guided and empowered and illuminated, our path may be illuminated by God's living light. One of the questions that I would like to pose, and this may be a little personal for the breakout room, but I'll just put it out here for your own personal reflection. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not sure if it came through or not, but one of the questions I think as a pilgrim we have to ask ourselves is, in what ways in my own life have I turned my gaze from God, the creator of the universe and source of all light, and become self-focused or self-absorbed, maybe even simply selfish? And then to reflect on the way the living light, the way I live my life in the context of living light. Or do I feel in some ways my light is waning? Another way to describe that in Hildegard terms is, do I feel my viriditas is beginning to dry up? Those are very personal questions. They may not be questions you're comfortable talking about in the breakout room. But another possibility to discuss in the breakout room is what your thoughts are on this whole idea of gemstones. I think it's much more common today for us to be using herbs and foods and other elements from the earth for healing. Gemstones are not as common, and I would agree with Annetta that if they were clever on the Hildegard Way, they would be selling little gemstone packages to the pilgrims. But just maybe something shocking or something new that you might have learned either about Hildegard or about the spiritual journey in today's session. With that, I'd like to close with a prayer since we didn't really get to open properly with prayer. So let us pray. Good and loving God, we thank you for the many gifts you have given us on this beautiful earth. During this fall season, winter if you're in Colorado, our gardens are overflowing with the fruits of the earth you have planted for us to enjoy, including in this cornucopia of gifts are precious stones, nuggets of glistening light tucked away deep in the darkness, waiting to be discovered, appreciated, celebrated, and used. Our complex lives are immersed in light and darkness, good and evil, love and hate. We come to this journey with a desire to walk along the path of light, the path of the new heaven and the new earth. Help us to always keep our gaze upon you as we walk with our sister Hildegard towards your living light. Open our minds and hearts so that we may find our way safely to the heavenly Jerusalem, where the streets are lined with every precious stone. May we grow in our own call to be mystics, to recognize your presence in every particle of the created world. We ask all of this in your holy name. Amen. So at this time, Michael will divide us up into our Anchorage rooms.